Welcome to Creative Caregiving and Beyond. More and more people are having to become caregivers for their elderly loved ones, and navigating this journey can be really difficult. This podcast will provide guidance and give practical tips for your family. Your host is Wendy Whiteman, elder law attorney, author, speaker, and leading insight advisor in senior protocol and senior lifestyle trends. Know that you are not alone in getting the help that you need. Let's get started. And here's Wendy.
Well, welcome. We have a great show for you today. We're going to find out some great information on helping your family through their senior years and getting things done right. Today we have a special guest. It's Catherine Turner. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here, Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Catherine is the author of Create a Legacy of Love. Everything you need, your loved one needs to know when they can no longer tell them. So that's great information, and we're going to find out exactly what that's about. So, Catherine, what is a legacy of love?
Well, Wendy, a legacy of love is leaving your loved ones in the very best place possible.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is we've all probably seen stories of families who have been fractured after a parent dies. For instance, siblings often run into a challenge of needing to make a lot of decisions.
Yes.
and deal with a lot of issues on the spur of the moment, and most of the time they're not agreeing, and these things, because it's such a highly charged time emotionally, these things can really fracture families, and sometimes for a lifetime. None of us want to leave our families in that space. So my message is about get prepared.
Yes.
Get prepared. There's a whole lot of legalities in which you are the one to help them with that. What this book is about is a lot of those things underlying that, smaller issues, but ones that can be equally as highly charged. It may not be who takes care of your children. It could be who takes care of your pet. Right. There's a lot of sentimental affairs that you need to put in order as well.
And those are great. Those are very great points, because, we were talking before we started the show today about how I prepare the legal documents, but there are a lot of things the legal documents don't cover. And we have these conversations, but this is a great way to let those you love know exactly how you feel. And I usually encourage clients to, have that conversation, but create a legacy of love, you're actually putting it on paper.
That's right.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Right. And when an issue isn't a legal issue, oftentimes just having it written in your own hand can make the difference between agreements or disagreements for your loved ones. Just to see it on paper, no matter what, that can make all the difference between something going awry. And, you want your final wishes to come through for you at the end of it all. Yes. I think some of us fantasize about what our funeral, who's going to be there, what the music's going to be like, what I guess the vibe of it will be. Well, we have the ability to create that
right
ahead of time. Having conversations is the best place to start, having those tough conversations, but writing it down takes it a step further to ensure that it actually gets followed through. And then, of course, deciding who you want to put in charge of making sure that happens at the end.
Very good, very good. So does your book actually coach a person through this process?
Yes, it's a workbook and a guide.
Okay.
So it gives you pages with which to document different things.
Very good.
A lot of things from what do I want for my funeral or end of life celebration, or there's so many options now for what you can do, even with your body, but it gives you a chance to write those things down. And honestly, one of the biggest values of the book is that it brings to light things that you probably have not thought of.
Right.
There's a lot of details that go into it. And I feel like when you think those things through and really get an idea of everything, it organizes it in your own mind. And then when you write it on paper, share it with your loved ones, it creates such a peace of mind for everyone involved.
Yes.
That I believe that it can even help eliminate some of your fear of death when you're organized about what it's going to be like at the end. Because, I've thought through myself, what do I really fear about dying? And I believe in an afterlife, so it's not that this life's no longer going to be. That doesn't scare me. The only thing that scares me is, where am I leaving my children? Right. What situation am I going to leave them in? And if I have no fear of that, if I've prepared for it and planned, and they know what those plans are, what do I really have to fear?
Right.
If we can eliminate some of our fear of death, how does that improve our quality of life?
Right. Exactly. And I tell clients that, we all tend to plan more for our vacation and weddings and fun things, but we still have to plan for our estate planning and our exit plan, so to speak, or transitioning to another generation. So it's perfectly healthy to have that conversation and eliminate those fears for the people that you're leaving in charge of all this, because it's a lot to take on.
and we as a society have a fear of talking about death. We have a bit of a death denial about us, that it's ever going to actually happen to us. And yet, we're still at 100% mortality rate.
Right.
So we do have to face it. And honestly, once you face it and start talking about it and having those conversations with your loved ones, they can be some of the most enlightening and bonding conversations you ever have.
Yes.
When you really get down to, this is what I want for myself at the end of time, and this is what I want for you. And those can be some of your best conversations you can have.
You're right. And then there are usually two types of people. There are people who want to take care of everything. They have no problem with the conversation. And then there are others who are like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to let somebody else handle it. And I did experience that with my grandmother. I mean, she took care of everything and had that frank conversation with us. And I was, I was probably in elementary school. And she'd tell us, this is what I want. I've taken care of this, and this is where this is. And so she just planned everything out. She had no problem. She was a strong Christian, and she knew where she would be going, and she had no problem with that. And it was just easy for her. But then there are others who are, I don't want to talk about it. You handle it. I'll let everybody else handle it. Well, someone's going to handle it, and someone's going to have to deal with it. Yes. And you talk about the sentimental affairs that need to be addressed. Give us an idea what those are.
For instance, I think that one of the best things you can do for yourself is to write your own eulogy prior to dying. Rather than leaving it up to someone else to speak for you, this is an opportunity for your final last words, for you to impart words of wisdom. You've got a captive audience like no other. And this is a chance to tell them who you are, what there's so much that you can do by writing your own eulogy, as well as your own obituary, which is a little bit more about the facts. But I think that also, again, you're eliminating the burden off of someone else's shoulder, whether it be your oldest son or your oldest daughter or whatever, to come up with that sort of task at such a highly charged time emotionally. I'm not even sure I could carry through emotionally when my loved one dies with a eulogy. I think it'd just be hard for me to talk at all. But let's just say that you have it pre-written and somebody, reads it for you. Or what if you took it a step further and you recorded it in your own voice? Now, some people might think that's creepy. I think it would be pretty awesome.
Well, we've seen that in movies. I remember a series called, was it the Ultimate Legacy? It's a series of movies that they show that, I think James Garner was in it or somebody, and they showed the videotaping of his wishes, and they had to meet these conditions, and only a estate planning lawyer would love movies like this, right? But it was so great. I thought it was so great. And but just to see their reaction to his heirs and the steps they had to complete to actually fully inherit. But you could also leave a legacy of how they think and best wishes and things like that as well.
There's a lengthy chapter in my book that asks all these questions.
Okay.
That if you just fill out the answers to those questions, you give someone a great wealth of information to pick from to write the eulogy. So at the very least, fill in those questions, because it's great stuff. Like, what was one of my favorite memories in life? What was one of the bravest things I've ever done? Things that especially elderly people yearn to talk about,
right,
and
right.
share.
That's so true.
A way to share some stories, that at the end can be, shared with all.
Yeah,
and
I totally agree.
They can be intimate or not. That depends on what you want, and that's the beauty of it. It can be just the way that you want it.
Yes.
Other sentimental affairs would be like, again, items that you don't have to will, like your home, of course, any property, but you can take sentimental items and specifically name who gets them and maybe even why,
right.
Why you want. And the one thing you don't want to do is burden people with, your children especially, with having to sort through a lot of physical items.
Right.
The truth is, nobody really wants your stuff, unless you do have someone who's, unless you do, specifically have someone who says, I'll take your stuff. I wouldn't burden anybody with that, and maybe give one or two very special items to each person who's important to you. Yeah. And you can list that in my book. Or another idea is to put a little sticky tape underneath some of those things that are in your household, and name the person whom you want to have them. And then name a place, a charity that you say, take everything else to this charity.
That's very, very good, because, usually I will do a personal belongings memorandum where those items that don't have to be probated, those personal effects can be listed and named and who they want them to have. And so I think that's brilliant to be able to do that and tell them why, because that really shows them that they gave a lot of thought towards the process and that they were thinking of them, and it was a special gift. They wanted them to have it, and they cherished it. So I think that's just brilliant to be able to do that.
Another section in my book talks about confessions and amends.
Ah.
So
what does that look like? What is that about?
Well, you know what? It's pretty open-ended, but it's just saying you may not have wanted to say this in person. It may have been uncomfortable, but let's just take an example of a sibling that maybe you have been estranged from for a lot of years. Maybe at the end of it, you just want to say, I regret that, and I'm sorry, and I forgive you, and I love you.
Yes.
And I also suggest that you write letters. It can be just, maybe even just to your children, but letters that really you leave them with.
Yes.
It's a gift. It's such a gift. So those are some of the sentimental affairs I'm talking about that go way beyond the legalities of the end of life. It's creating a legacy of love where you're sort of able to, I like to say that you're sprinkling fairy dust of love all over all of them after you're gone.
Yes. Yes.
Sometimes long after you're gone.
Well, I love that. I love the confessions and amends. They get an opportunity to fix that relationship. It's just something that I've seen a lot as a lawyer. Some families get along and some don't. And those family members that have that conflict, they may not have spoken, sometimes parents to their children, in years. They've forgiven them, but they haven't had that opportunity to express that. So I do get what you're saying. That's a great way to be able to do that and just kind of make amends and get closure on that particular situation. Yeah.
And even if you worry that they may not ever see that, if you've written it, you're going to go to your deathbed more peacefully.
Right. Right.
So this book at the same time is really just a start. It gets you to thinking about a lot of things, because when we think about and talk about these things, again, it just takes away our fear of it.
Right.
And boy, that's the first step we've got to take. And then it makes all those conversations so much easier. Your grandmother was a great example. And I have to, you don't know necessarily the answer to this, but how much did that help your acceptance of her death when she did die?
Yes.
It could not have been a small amount.
Right.
We don't know because you don't have,
Yeah.
a control factor
really
there, but it probably really made it such that you were able to accept it and move on more easily, as well as your parent who lost their parent.
Yes. Especially when, they were at peace about it and they knew where they were going. They knew that it was going to be okay, and they wanted everybody else to be okay, Yes. So I think that's a very, very, very good point, Catherine. It can really just kind of pass on some peace, so to speak.
Yes. I have a 93-year-old father, and he's filled out his book, and he is so happy that he had this book to fill out, because it is harder for that generation to have these conversations.
Yes.
And I know for myself, I don't fear his death as much, because I know that he's, we've had the conversation about him being at peace with it as well. But he's also said, it's in my book.
Yeah.
You've got what you need in my book. And it's like, okay, Dad.
It's in the book. Get the book.
I just know that I'm going to be able to accept his death and be at peace with it much more easily as a direct result. And you just can't put a price on that.
Yes. Well, how did you come about writing the book? Is it because of your parents, or what experience did you have to make you want to, or prompt you to write this book?
That's a really good question. So I've got two answers. My mother did die, and there was a point in time where I was really like, man, her funeral service just did not reflect her personality at all.
Okay.
And I sure wish it would have, because she was an amazing woman, and the funeral service was quite dead, really. I mean,
yeah.
No pun intended, but it didn't reflect who she was. And
yes.
I regretted that, but I don't feel like it was something that I thought about for a long time. It didn't really weigh on me, but
Right.
a few years after that happened, I had a dream, and the book came to me in a dream, Wendy,
Wow.
and I don't know how else to put it except that it felt like an assignment from God.
Yes.
I woke up feeling like, where did that idea come from, and why me? And at the time there was no way I had the wherewithal to write a book. I was running another business. I was raising 2 kids, mostly alone in a very unsupportive marriage. I was homeschooling. I was like, I don't know how I could possibly get this accomplished. But, I just started bit by bit by bit. And when I started doing my research, which was mostly talking to people and getting their stories of, how has this affected you? Good or bad? Was your parent prepared or not? And hearing so many stories of so many families that had been fractured in a varying number of ways, I became really passionate about the subject. And it's my life's work now.
Yes. Well, you're doing a great job.
It needs to be discussed and talked about more openly. I'm on this agenda of let's get people talking.
Right.
And start there. Stop being afraid of death.
Right. Well, it's the same, process I see with my clients sometimes, just, doing an estate plan, because most people, the majority of people don't have one because of that fear. And fear can really stifle you from doing things that are responsible and things that we all have to get done. So I think this is a great way to even get the conversation started about doing an estate plan. It's I think an easier way to enter that process versus, I always counsel clients, do it when you don't need to have it done. Because if you're under pressure, there's a medical emergency, catastrophic situation, it's hard to make right decisions. You don't remember everything. It's just too emotional. But when you don't have to have it done, this is a great way to do it.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I say the first thing to do is put yourself in the mindset of the loved ones that you're leaving behind.
Very good point. Yes.
Unburden them.
Yes.
It's the most loving thing you can do.
That's so true. That is so true.
I really believe that. And then don't, my book can be, because it points out things that you haven't even thought about. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's a lot to this. Take a step back and don't feel like you have to do it all at once. Look at what's most important to you right now, or just what's an easier low-hanging fruit. Like I think a low-hanging fruit is pick your funeral song. Choose a song that really just kind of exemplifies you and maybe even your feelings around dying. Because I'll tell you one thing that a story, it's just a short little story I wrote in my book, but my grandmother was this 100% Irish woman, just the epitome of Irish. She was very chatty, very, she was awesome. But I didn't know her very well because I always lived several states away from her and really didn't get to know her very well throughout her life. But she was quite a character. And at her funeral, they played Danny Boy, and that was her favorite song.
Yes.
And I was sitting on a beach in Hawaii listening to a band, and they played Danny Boy. And I'll tell you what, my grandmother came to me
instantly,
as clearly and as beautifully as she could. And I'm like, I want a song that will do that for people.
Yes.
I want a song that when they hear it, they think of me. And so choose that song and make sure that that's going to be played at your funeral.
Oh, that's just beautiful. That is so beautiful. I went to a client's funeral years ago, and his wife passed away, and he used to sing to her. They were dating, and he was in World War II. You Are My Sunshine. And so they played that at the funeral. It was just so beautiful. He would always sing it to her. I thought that was just so lovely to do that. And but you're right. It's just that was probably 15 years ago, and I still remember it. It was just so special. Yeah.
There's something about music that's got this crazy, amazing way of having an emotion. Hearing a song can take you right back to a memory, and that's a beautiful thing. So it's one way we can keep living on, in the hearts and souls of those we love the most.
Well,
one thing, this just reminds me, one thing my dad said he put in his book is because of his age, and he said, there's so many great songs that were popular in my day that are lost now. No one knows of these songs. He goes, I wrote down the lyrics and they're in my book.
Aw, that's wonderful.
So that you can pass them on. He wants them to be passed on for generations and not forgotten. And I thought that was pretty cool.
That was wonderful. That's just great. Yeah. That's just a great idea. So they can get just as creative as they want to be, as individual as they are.
Absolutely.
When they're filling out the book and the process. Now let me ask you, with your dad, did he complete it by himself, or were you on hand, or your siblings, or?
I just gave him the book, and he wanted to do it on his own.
Okay.
And he really doesn't want us to see it until the end. He's like, no, I've got it filled out. It's all there. It's fine. But he doesn't want to go through it with us ahead of time.
Right.
That's his personal choice. That's awesome.
Yeah. I could see that. And, and it's a great, keepsake, so to speak, too. After a person passes away, you still have that with you. I mean, normally there's an obituary, but this is just something so personal that the family can treasure and have all those great memories and pass that on to other generations about their great grandparents and so on. So that's good to have. You think about it. I mean, I can't tell you a whole lot about my great grandparents, what their favorite song was, or their favorite food, or anything like that. But that's just something awesome to have.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would like my great grandchildren someday to know certain things about me, that
yes,
that they wouldn't otherwise. So it's just having those be a part of your final wishes. Those sentimental sort of things, I think is fantastic. Yeah. I think that's every bit as important as it is to write down your family medical history.
Yes.
That's in the book as well. A lot of that family medical history isn't as much documented as it is remembered. And we have to, it's our responsibility. It's a critical responsibility that we write those things down that we know about so that our children know what's in our medical histories. I mean, isn't it kind of interesting that we don't have any sort of documentation about medical histories and families? I mean, it's just,
that's so true. I mean, because when you think about medical records, I mean, they haven't been around forever.
Right.
And to access that. So you're right.
And even
you're
the ones that
right.
are, do we have access to those? Do we even have access to other people's medical records? So I just, in my book, I just say, write down everything you know. Did you have aunts that died of, breast cancer or Alzheimer's? Or, I mean, as far back as you can go. And then have family members contribute to that,
Right,
what do they know? Other family members. And then hopefully if you've started that, that will get passed down to generations. So your legacy of love, Wendy, can impact generations. And when you think about it as unburdening your loved ones, leaving behind these fantastic reasons why people are going to remember and love you long past this life, and how it can impact generations, it gives you some incentive to get your book complete.
It really does. It really does.
And then you still should chunk it down. Just give yourself one project every few weeks. Chunk it down to something that's manageable and not a burden to yourself, because it's a very enjoyable process once you get it started. And once you're sort of seeing how it's going to have this a much greater effect than what it seems like. At the beginning of the process, you think, I'll just do all these. But it's like, no, there are some pesky tasks about it, like putting financial documents in order and, some of those, creating a digital estate can be a pesky project, just recording everything that Oh, that one's a whole other story.
Yes, yes, yes.
Digital estate that we don't need to get into. But that's one that's going to be a little like, oh, this isn't as fun, but very important, especially if you don't want to leave. There's a lot of loose ends to tie up there. Like I said, that's another whole conversation.
Well, and a great conversation, because that's one of those things that most people don't think about. I mean, that's something that you probably wouldn't expect to even encounter until you're there. That's, yeah, yeah.
Well, and it's such a new problem that that there isn't a 100% great way of going about it. Like if you take, some of the big companies like, Google and Facebook and Amazon, and maybe some of those that you most likely have accounts with, every single one of them has a different rules around what happens if you die. And sometimes it can take an act of Congress practically to undo an account. Anyway, it's a big subject, but there are some things you can do to simplify the process for someone else to just quickly tie up a lot of those loose ends, and it's in my book.
I love it. I love that. I love that. So if someone, Catherine, wanted to start the process, how could you help them?
Well, I offer on my website a 20-minute consultation because there's so many variables, Wendy. Everybody is in a different place. Everybody has different issues. Everybody has different things that are important to them. There's a lot of questions to ask. Do you have children or not? Do you have pets or not? There's a lot of different, but in a 20-minute conversation, I can at least guide them to where to start.
Okay.
And I offer that at no charge for anybody who is ready to get prepared.
Okay.
A starting point is a great spot. And then I can work with that person on an ongoing basis with, how I said, chunk it down and take one step at a time.
Yes.
I can chunk that down for you and send you email modules of, let's take this step next, depending again on where you're at. So customizing a guidance tool is one of the things that I feel like I can do best. But start with a 20-minute consultation to see if it's even a good fit for you. And you can do that for free on my website, which is createalegacyoflove.com.
Very good. Very good. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that too. And that's a great service, especially if someone, is filling out the book and they don't necessarily want to share it with their family just yet or talk to them about it, but they do want to, run it off, run it by someone else or have someone else there to counsel with.
I can be an accountability partner to whatever the degree they want, whether it's just an emailed reminder or a personal phone call.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes all that people need to just, it's just keeping your feet to the fire and getting the project done. Because again, if you were getting married, you would be planning your wedding to the nth degree and getting it. This is actually a life. This is a life journey that's so much more important even than, I'm not saying than marriage, but a wedding, it's more important than. So planning for it with as much diligence is the very least you should be doing.
Yes, yes. I totally agree. And that's, you've done a great job pointing out the differences between, even the estate planning part of it, a will versus your book, because it does, handle a lot of those nuances that the legal documents just simply don't cover, and you can't include in, necessarily the legal documents. So I love that. I love that aspect.
Don't you feel like this would be a great value add for estate planners, Wendy?
Oh, definitely, because I'm going to order some. I think these would be some good Christmas gifts too. Because
for your current clients, absolutely.
Yeah, because at the end of the year, or around holidays, I get a lot of calls. After Thanksgiving, after Christmas, after the New Year, because people are setting goals, or they met with the family, and they're like, we need to get this taken care of, and so it's a great way to get that conversation started We were talking about your book and my book, and they both cover some of the same issues of having the conversation. But I love the way your book gears into those finite nuances of those specific details of planning things out, and communicating with that loved one, and on how they feel about it, what they're about, what their life was about, their legacy. That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
And I love how yours is really geared toward the caregiver, because that caregiver is likely the person that's going to be burdened.
Yes.
At the end of it all, if just the lowest hanging fruit is the caregiver being an adult child, and the most likely scenario is with an aging parent. So just using that as the example, that caregiver has so much to gain from having their parent go through this process, and yet it is the parent that absolutely needs to go through the process. So those two books really mesh well, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. I love that, and it allows the person to still keep their dignity, and of knowing that they're honored and respected, their opinion is respected, and how they wanted things to play out. So I think it's just a great way of doing that. And thank you so much for sharing that with our audience today. Do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to leave with us?
Start now, and I don't care what age you are.
Yeah.
Start now, and just do a bit at a time.
Yes.
Start with some of the most important things. Really think about if you were on your deathbed tomorrow for some weird reason, what would be the thoughts that are going through your head? What would be your fears? What would be your regrets? What would be the things that you're thinking about?
Right.
And taking this step of getting started with this process can eliminate a lot of that trepidation around it. Like, oh my gosh, I can imagine being on my deathbed and being grateful that I had these conversations and written this stuff down. It's like that can make me go happily into the end of my life much more easily. And I think that's how we need to think about this. For us and for our parents, we need to encourage our parents to do this for us and for themselves. Yeah. Those are my closing thoughts.
Well, thank you so much for those. And I know it's a heavy conversation. I understand that, but it's one of those things that we have to all, really come to grips with and make sure it's taken care of for our loved ones. And Catherine, you're absolutely right. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book and create a legacy of love with our audience. And we'll make sure we put up your website and how to purchase the book, because I'm going to be definitely getting a lot of them from my family and my clients. I think it's going to be a perfect way to segue into estate planning documents and things like that, and answering those questions. So thank you for coming today, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like us on social media, and check on a senior, because it just might brighten your day.